Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 on near death experience. Last week, I talked about my near death like experience and what it suggested about the nature of this world and about this experience that we are having now. So, today, what we'll do is answer a few of the questions that were submitted in response to that. So, let me know if everything's coming through okay in the comments section. And as everybody joins us, let's just take a minute to clear out this space. To clear out old ways of thinking, old beliefs, and make way for something new, or, as the case may be, something ancient and timeless. We're talking about near death type experiences, or less specifically, mystical type experiences. Clearing the gateways, clearing the apparent boundaries between body, mind, world, you and me. Between frames of space and time, and notions of reality, illusion, and unreality. Clarity. All right. So if the audio is coming through, just make a note. Looks like it is. I see a few comments here. Hello, Beth, Jennifer, Tammy, Geeta, Suniti. All right. So let's jump into some of these questions. First of all, let me say broadly, there were many comments I received here and also through the website. And there are so many stories that you shared about your own experiences, including experiences as if lightning had struck, as if moving through a tunnel, as if seeing a bright light, as if enveloped in darkness, going beyond the body, going beyond the mind, trying to integrate it with what happens afterwards. So many, which goes to show that these kinds of experiences are happening quite a bit. And I know many people will then say, hey, but it hasn't happened to me, or such an experience happened to me. And that's part of what I tried to touch on last time. In fact, that gets into the first question, I think. So let's just go there. So one of the questions was, is it possible to have a mystical experience like this for anyone? Right. So we can see from the comments itself that many people have had such experiences. So is it possible for anyone? So one of the keys to understanding this question and answering this question is to see, what is this experience that we're talking about? Right. So when we're talking about a near death type experience or a near death experience itself, it's when the body itself is in a state of near death, which can be confirmed by other people, right? Either doing some kind of resuscitation or during some kind of trauma. And in this episode, the sense of identity shifts beyond the body. So sometimes it's called an out of body experience. And what's experienced in that time is that there is some other kind of world or other worlds, plural, in addition to this kind of world, and that our existence is not dependent upon this body or this world. This is generally what happens. And this is framed in many ways, right? So the probably the most popular way to frame it is that there is a soul and the soul continues even after the body stops. There's the way of saying that the individual identity is not dependent on the body, and we can look at it through different philosophical perspectives. That's another way to kind of storify, to tell the story of it. But essentially, the core of this is that what we are, the sense of identity, is not restricted to the body. From a personal perspective, right? From the perspective of the individual person, the sense is that the identity is not what I thought it was, or what I am, is not only what I thought myself to be. So, is it only possible to have that experience with some kind of dramatic experiences, right? The stories that you will hear about near death like experiences and even mystical like experiences, the stories that you will hear will tend to be dramatic ones because those are the ones that make the news, right? And those are the ones that cause us to stop and say, hey, what's going on? What about all these ideas and beliefs that I've been taught, and how is it compatible with science, and how can I make sense of it? All of this happens usually when there's some kind of dramatic experience. But I think the key to really understanding this question and seeing what's really possible is to look at the experience now, like we talked about last week, right? To see that there's nothing about this experience that you and I are having now that is not mystical, if we are honest, right? We don't have to describe some experience over there as being especially elaborate and dramatic and fireworks and mystical, because this experience right now, we don't know right now already, what is this body made of? Let's ask a very simple question. And you'll go to, cells and particles, and medical school pretty much stops there. But then if you go into physics, then you'll get into fields, and then you'll get into the nature of space-time, and then we'll have to talk about the precursors of space-time, and ultimately get to a question mark. We don't know when it comes down to it, right? What is this mind that we keep talking about? Sounds so simple. Yeah, there's the body and the mind, and we have to bridge the body and the mind, right? This gets into a question about mental health and mental illness that somebody asked, right? What are the implications for mental illness? Well, in biomedical science, we don't know what the mind is. That's just not a subject of inquiry. The nature of mind is not a subject of inquiry, right? So if we don't know fundamentally what these are, then why are we assuming that this experience right now is non-mystical? The only reason we say it's non-mystical is because we're used to it. There's a saying that familiarity breeds contempt, right? In this case, familiarity breeds inattention, right? Inattention, INATT, inattention. Because it's so familiar, we're not really attending to what's happening, because we have this public story about what's happening and how to engage with what's happening, right? Public story about who I am and what this laptop is and what this world is and what space and time are. And so two keys here in terms of this question, right? One is not that we should be going after these kinds of mystical experiences. I think that can become a problem, right? Either one, it can happen, and then a person keeps looking for bigger and bigger experiences like any other addiction or any other kind of drug. Or number two, it doesn't happen, and then a person feels like I'm not special, or it can't happen to me, or I'm not spiritual, right? Both of which are incomplete, dramatically incomplete perspectives. Rather, if we look more into the nature of what is happening now, right? I like to say that if we see this moment clearly, everything becomes clear, right? Whether it's whatever kind of experience we're talking about, right? All the questions and all the answers are here in this experience of identity and perception and cognition and space and time. So rather than in meditation trying to have some kind of spiritual experience, in meditation try to look at the nature of one's own identity, because one's own identity is the gateway to this, right? This is not often talked about in near-death type experiences, but it is the breakdown of that barrier of what identity was thought to be that is the fuel for these experiences, right? Or that is the kind of unlocking of these experiences. So this experience now is undefined unless we overlay our concepts of what we are experiencing. So if we can get to that level of nakedness of concepts and then start to look at our experience, then things will start to open up right here. All right. Someone says, my understanding so far is the human mind is veiled from our spirit mind. Yes, that's one way to say it. That the sense of boundary, or the sense of kind of like the blinders on the racehorse, that veils the broader, more comprehensive aspect of what is happening now. All right. So one says, how can NDEs, near death experiences, be viewed in the light of non dual teachings? So, non dual teachings, essentially, the core of that is that what we see as many is something that is not fundamentally different, that is something non distinct. So, the world of distinctness and multiplicity is the reflection of non distinct experience, right? Just like the many examples are the many ripples on a lake are one and the same water, right? The many gusts of wind are one and the same air. Even the many thoughts are one and the same mind. Similarly, manyness itself, or the appearance of boundaries and therefore distinction and therefore multiplicity, is itself a self superimposition on this underlying intelligence. So, this is the essence of non dual teachings. And furthermore, one more link that, of course, therefore, our nature is this non dual essence, right? If all multiplicity is the appearance of that, then so too me and you as individuals, we are also appearances of this. So this non-distinct experience of identity is what non-dual teachings are pointing to. And near-death type experiences are one kind of experience, one kind of evidence that can take us toward that, right? Why is that? Because in these experiences, we simply go beyond the boundary of what we thought living means, or the body means, or the mind means, or a lifetime means, or what it means to exist. And these are all fundamental boundaries we are given in the world culture, right? At least in the secular culture, often the idea is that there is one lifetime for the identity, right? Or for some religions, there is one lifetime for the identity. It's all now or never, right? As opposed to ideas where life extends beyond the body, mind extends beyond the body, where life is not opposed to death. All of these are core beliefs, whether it's one way or the other in society. And when any core belief cracks, now experience enters a new space, right? It's just like an eggshell. When an eggshell cracks, now experience cannot be restricted to either within the eggshell or outside the eggshell, right? Once the shell has cracked, we're in a new experience. We're in a non-dual experience where neither the duality of inside versus outside nor the duality of outside versus inside, right? So similarly, in near-death experiences, that shell of body identity can crack. And therefore, because it's such a fundamental type of identity in this world culture, therefore, there can be a shift toward non dual understanding or to an appreciation of what non duality is suggesting. Because, hey, if after all that identity can change, then maybe much more can change, is the implication. Carol asked, do those that have had a near death experience say their experience was good and positive? Many do, but many also say it was very challenging. In my experience, afterwards was very challenging. Right? The experience itself, not so much, but the ongoingness of it, right, made it very challenging because it made it impossible to go back to kind of unsee and to go back to the previous ways of doing things. And in my case, this was right at the beginning of, or towards the end of medical school. And so starting a residency in emergency medicine, you can imagine the ideas and the frameworks that we are given and that we have to follow are sometimes broken or seen beyond through this kind of perspective. So how do you integrate these? That couldn't be ignored. So that made it very difficult. So there are some very pleasant and nice experiences, and there are some very difficult experiences. Sometimes they're within the same experience, sometimes it extends over time. All right. Beth asked, did you not want to come back? That's a difficult question. I would say I did. If so, last week I mentioned that there was a kind of an intimation given that, hey, there's still stuff to do, so to speak, and that made me kind of stop in my tracks. Um, Not that it forced me to, but because my own inclination was resonating with that, I stopped in my tracks, and that's all it took for everything to kind of remold. So yes, in a sense, I did want to come back. All right. So what do NDEs tell us about death? So this is now clear based on the last two, that when we talk about death in the society, we are talking about the stoppage of the body. And what NDEs suggest is that death is actually opposed to what we call birth, but it's not opposed to life, right? So life has no opposite, in my view, in the English language. Birth and death are opposites of each other. So it's not life and death situations, it's birth and death situations. And what we call death is a transition to another kind of experience based in NDE type experience, based in the three minds framework, based in many philosophies. But in the usual world culture, especially in the academic culture, that is not appreciated because it is a first mind culture. All right. And then the relationship to mental health and mental health and mental illness. Well, one of the broad points to understand is that when we're talking about biomedical science, right, which makes the diagnosis of mental illness, right, what we call mental illness, and the knowledge of biomedical science is body-based knowledge, right? It's a materialist perspective. It's not that it has to be materialist, but it is. It's just the way the culture is. It's given through a materialist interpretation of what body is and mind is. So the biomedical science, the strength is obviously the body and molecular biology, molecules and atoms, right? That's the strength of biomedical science. And yet when we have our diagnostic constructs for mental illness, remember, these are diagnostic constructs, which means that they're ways of thinking about experience, right? So a certain types of experience we may cluster and give it one label, right? When we say this is a personality disorder, another kind of experience we may cluster and give it a label of depression. Whether we give these labels or not, they are still experiences in and of themselves. They're still experiences of difficulty and or of suffering. But now the question is whether the constructs we are using, right, namely these diagnoses, these mental illness diagnoses, are these the right constructs? Are these the best way to think about these experiences to help people? And I think that comes into question when we can see, for example, through an NDE, that what we call mind and experience is not restricted to a body nor dependent on a body, right? Certain kinds of experiences, yes, they are in association with the body, surely, but that doesn't mean that the mind is entirely dependent on the body. And so if we acknowledge this, if we accept this as possible, then we have a problem here, because the strength of biomedical science is not mind. And yet we're saying that mind, in a way, has primacy even over body, in the sense that it outlasts the body. So now it leads us to a place where our constructs, our very constructs of illness, specifically mental illness, we have to question, because the knowledge base is not there, right? It doesn't mean they're not useful. It doesn't mean that our approaches cannot help. It just means that they then become radically incomplete, because our training is not matching the construct. All right. So that's one point. The other point is, regarding the construct of mental illness, is that we don't have to get into these kinds of matters of metaphysics, for example, right? Just from a simpler perspective, again, when the training is in biomedicine and bio molecular medicine, when that is the basis, and yet we're faced with a situation where we have to deal with something called mind or something called experience, then what happens is we have to force it into that construct, right? So not only are we not looking at other ranges of mind, but even things in our society, right? The events in our society are ways of behavior, right? Maybe not everyone is meant to work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Not everyone is meant to sit at a desk in school. Not everyone is going to do anything like everyone else does it, right? So even the most basic things in our society, the most basic activities of our society, once we assume that everyone has to be more or less this way, that creates a certain imbalance, because that might not be the natural way for somebody to function. And this can eventually lead to difficulty and suffering, which then gets interpreted through the lens of a materialist culture and a materialist perspective on science, and ends up as mental illness. You see? So we can look at it from many perspectives. Yes, from the metaphysical perspective, there are other ranges of mind that we do not understand, and we don't know in medicine how they're impacting our experience. That's one. But even the tendency, the momentum of having to frame things biomedically means that we're not looking at simple sociological factors like our behaviors in society, our expectations, emotions within the family, relationships, things that may yield better constructs to talk about suffering than the current diagnostic structure for mental illness. All right, so it's a subtle point, but it's an important point that I think we need more education around. All right, why don't we stop it here for this time, and next week what we'll do, if I'm on, either next week or the week after, we'll talk about integration a little bit more, right? So I can talk more about my experience after this and the next several years, because it was a very intense and difficult several years. And along those lines, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about is, many people have told me about the difficulties of integration, right? Or how to go through this process and deal with it, especially in relationship, because there are many people in relationships with partners that either they are having one kind of experience and the other person is not, or vice versa, or each person is going through some kind of experience, some kind of change, maybe even a spiritual experiences, but they're coming from different perspectives, right? So how do we deal with this? How do you deal with this in a relationship? And this is something that I myself have been dealing with for years, because I also am married. I have a son, right? So how do you integrate this? So I was actually talking about this with my partner, Mani, and we decided that if people are interested, we can we can talk to people one-on-one, either with you and your partner, or you or your partner, just to talk about the aspects of integration with spirituality and life, spirituality and whatever is happening, right? Whether it's in the professional sphere, in the personal sphere, in the spiritual sphere. How do we integrate all this? So if you're interested in that, you can contact us. This is her website, malinecreates.com. You can either go to my website or hers and just send us a message if you're interested, and we can follow up with that. Let's see. Kimberly says, have you written any books? Yes. Kimberly, if you go to the website, anoopkumar.com, there are a couple books there. And what significant change? So we'll talk about some of this more next week or next time. Thank you for joining me. If you have questions, contact us through the website, or you can post them here and I will check some of them. Thank you.